All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
You get me for 2 weeks in a row. So. Which is nice. I haven't taught in a little bit. I didn't teach as much while I was doing my class, so now we're back to Torah study.
How many sessions did you give on your class? Like, how long was that?
It was 6 weeks.
Oh, 6, okay.
Yeah.
So 6 presentations?
Yep.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
It's available online.
It is online.
Great.
So, yes, which was a lot of fun.
Yep.
But it was a lot of work, but I enjoyed it.
Is there a blooper reel?
No, I don't think so. But I mean, more because I think the bloopers are just intermixed.
All right.
All my
It was
tongue
really
twisters
good.
and
I'm
things
not-
I said incorrectly and whatever.
I'm not totally done with the last couple classes, but it was really good.
That's good. Well, thank you. It was fun. I had a good time with it. All right, but now we're in Deuteronomy. Not talking about the tabernacle. I'll see if I can squeeze it in somewhere. Just kidding. But this portion is so full. But there's lots of things I like, and I honestly just mostly have a list of just summary of like what all of this is talking about. But there's so many topics. So if there's anything in particular that anybody wants to talk about, make sure we don't skip over it. But I mean, because there's so many things that we could do a deep dive on. So we'll just kind of start going through, and if there's something in particular that you want to spend more time on, then slow me down. And there's a lot of things in here that connect with other parts of the Bible or even the New Testament. We have some examples of some of these things being played out throughout the Bible. I don't have references written down for all of that, but we can find them. And I brought my iPad if I need to chat GPT. Hey, where is that passage? Real fast, we can do that. It's like my favorite use for chat GPT is like, give me a summary of all that. It's like great for summarizing things, or like pull me a list of all this so I don't have to spend all this time going through. And like I use it a lot for that. Like give me a list of all the verses that talk about this or where this happens or whatever. And that's how I use ChatGPT. So it saves me a lot of time. But anyway, so we can do some of that if we want to, but we'll just kind of start going through. And I guess like my I don't know, maybe a framing or a guiding question, which is really a guiding question that I use for all of the Torah. But for this portion specifically, when we're talking about so many difficult topics, is what does this reveal about God's character? Or maybe another version of that, or along with that is what does this teach us about how God wants us to relate to other people like that are both like close to us and as well as people outside from other nations or other groups or whatever. Because of course the language here is more of like Israel and then other nations or outsiders among them, but we can think of that as, like people within our community and people outside of our community is kind of a similar type of framework I think that we could use for that. So those are the kinds of things I think about as I read through a portion like this that has so many topics in it. So we are starting in Deuteronomy 21. I'm not going to backtrack. We didn't get through the whole portion last week, but I'm not backtracking because there's too much in this one. So we're going to start in Deuteronomy 21, verse 10. And our portion goes through the end of chapter 25. So that's kind of our section that we're looking at. And we will encounter all kinds of things from stoning to divorce to children to slavery to all kinds of other things. So business and loans and war and all those kinds of things. Lots of big topics in this portion. But starting out in chapter 21, verse 10, this first 7 verses through verse 17, or well, that's not true. So it's almost like paragraph by paragraph is a different topic. So really 10 through 14 starts us out with this: if you're going to war, this is how you're to treat the women of the conquered nation or people group or whatever. And it basically, going through, I'm not going to read everything word for word, but basically they're to allow the woman to grieve their family They can take them as a wife, but they can't. Basically, the summary is if you want this woman from this conquered people group, you have to take her as a wife. You can't rape her. That's really what it comes down to. And really, like culturally, and I'll make this also this general side note. So Dennis Prager's commentary is really interesting about all of these things. What I like about it is how he does a lot of he gives a lot of like greater context as far as like this is how other nations would deal with this, and this is one of them, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as like here's how we see this playing out today, or how it's impacted law or culture in the modern time. He is sometimes a bit cynical, and I don't always love all of his thought processes, so I think it's helpful, but don't take everything he says as this is the only way to look at this. So you kind of have to take some of his thought processes with a grain of salt, but I do like that he gives a lot of the like this is what all the other nations in the world were doing in this situation. And this is how Israel is different. So there's lots of examples of this is how Israel is different than the nations around it, and being this example nation, really this light to the nation's reality through all those things. So this is one of them, because even up through more modern wars, like you see this of like when enemies are conquered, that the conquering nation or army takes the women and does what they want with them. It is, and there's lots of really horrific things that we could talk about there. We're not going to get into all those details, but this is basically saying you can't do that. These are still people, they're still humans, and you can't degrade them in that way, and you can't use them in that way. So if you really, so of course the amount of time that this is going to take is going to probably allow this man to come to their senses if they're acting in a moment of passion of wanting this woman, and decide if they really want to marry her, which is a lifelong commitment, not just a momentary moment. So this is definitely something that is different than in ancient times, and even like I said, up to more modern realities of this is like you can't do this, and his, I don't know, I didn't fact check Dennis Prager on this, but he talks about like the IDF, even the Israeli army today doesn't tend to partake in this behavior, and it's probably because of this. So again, it's one of those passages that's honoring women and honoring just people in general, and saying like people can't be used for your own momentary pleasures, I guess you could say. So then it moves on to this. So 15 through 17 is about having two wives, and one is loved and the other is unloved, which always makes me think of Rachel and Leah with Jacob. And the Bible, so this is like, polygamy is like one of these hot topics with the Bible, right? And we've talked about it some before, but so we don't have to spend a ton of time on this unless people want to talk about it more. Is that the Bible doesn't really condone it, but it allows it. And the reason it usually is allowed is because, and actually we might just skip and talk about, there's another portion later on that talks about like if a man's brother dies, that the man takes the brother's wife, but that their firstborn child would bear the name of the deceased brother to carry on the family line. So we can talk about that kind of in conjunction with this a little bit too. Is that generally when the Torah kind of makes allowances for having more than one wife, it's actually to care for the woman. It's because that is probably actually the best circumstance, because women, particularly in ancient cultures, living a full life as a single woman was very difficult. So I mean, this is so it's even thinking, and Jewish law now does not allow for polygamy. But again, you think about cultures, like even thinking about myself as a single woman, like I can make a living, I can support myself, I can inherit things, I can buy property, I can do all the things, right? So this is not so much of a concern. But so very often here, but it's even talking about, if you have two wives and one is loved and one's unloved, you can't show favoritism this specific circumstance is talking about if the firstborn son is from the unloved wife. You can't favor the loved wife's son just because you love her more. So there's a lot about just, about being fair and things like that. And then, like I said, we can kind of lump in a little bit this situation, which is in chapter 25. So chapter 25, verses 5 through 10 talks about this scenario where a man takes on his brother's widow. And again, this is to care for that woman, and also, especially in hopes that she would have a son that would carry on the lineage of the deceased brother. So again, this is like a scenario that sounds kind of strange to us, because we don't really see this a lot in our culture, and we wouldn't really do this necessarily. But at this time, this is actually taking care of the widow, giving the widow opportunity for to live a better life, to be taken care of, and all those things. Yeah.
Such a funny name. House of the pulled off sandal.
Oh yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Yes.
I guess it means something because they pulled it off.
Yeah, there's like this ritual. I don't remember if does it describe it all here? There's something about like these exchanging sandals or something.
Spit in their face.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and this is more or less where we get this concept of the kinsman redeemer, which we see. It's not a brother, but it's a part of the family, right? That we see with Boaz, with Ruth, and all of that. So it's a similar situation as to this. So anyway, so that is one that's definitely not so much of a. We don't see that so much, but we do see the character of the Lord there in caring for women. Really, so far, the situations we've talked about is very much about care for women, which again is another thing that people like to use, particularly the Torah and the Old Testament, to say like how terrible it is towards women, and it's actually quite the opposite. It's actually like Israel, by and large, the summary is that they are commanded to treat women much better than other nations would be treating women.
But it just shows you that, how important it is, if we're going to understand these texts, to get a sense of, some clarity on what was it like, because if you don't have that as a barometer, it looks atrocious. According to like modern standards, it's like people really they stumble over this.
Yeah, and I think it's also looking at it as, it's helpful to know, not that everybody has to do a deep dive into all ancient culture, understanding the entire ancient world. But to have just a little bit of that context, I think, is helpful. And also to just think about it in terms of, like, how does this, so this is like where it starts, right? These commandments, there's like, this is the beginning of, this is how you're to act differently than other nations. And then we can see how it carries forward to, like, the example I was just using of myself, to where now I'm like, I can, I have all the rights as a single woman, and so, but this is kind of the foundation of that, honestly. And it has to do with, treating people as people in all situations. And we'll see that come up again as we look at some of the other situations that are in this portion. But yeah, I think it's a framework. It's something I really like to point out, not just because I'm a woman, because there are these misconceptions about how God is presented and how the Israelites are presented in the Torah, that it's just not true. And when you do contrast it with other nations, you see how dignified, I guess you could say, this really is, even though to our modern framework it doesn't look that way necessarily on the surface. So it is I think it is worth looking at some of that. So the next one is another challenging one. In verses 21:18 through 21, this is about a rebellious son who does not listen to his parents. It does list both father and mother here. They discipline him, but he does not listen. So I'm gonna read this section. So I just kind of paraphrase verse 18. So starting in verse 19, then his father and mother are to grab hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his place. They will say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He does not listen to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city are to stone him with stones to death. So you will purge evil from your midst, and Israel will hear and be afraid. So I'm going to start out by saying there's like no record of this ever actually happening. So why is it there? So the thought process is, and this is, again, if this comes up, a similar thing comes up again later in the portion, is that when this is the penalty, it's kind of making a point of like, this is sin, and this is the punishment for it. Now, so why doesn't it get carried out? So notice some of the language here. So it's talking about both parents. So the father, even though this is a patriarchal society, father cannot act on his own necessarily. Father and mother both bring him to the elders of the city, which would be like the court, essentially. So the elders are the governing court for the city in this context. So it's like basically taking him to court is essentially what this is saying. Pleading the case, and if it's decided that, he is guilty of being rebellious and whatever, and that this is the penalty he deserves, then all the men of the city have to stone him, and the parents don't. So what that's interesting is that the parents actually are not carrying out this punishment, which I don't know that I know of a single parent who would be willing to stone their child. I'm not sure I really know of parents. Again, this is meant to point out how bad this situation really is. It's like, I'm not sure that I know a whole lot of parents that would bring their child before a court knowing that this is an option, that their kid is going to be stoned by all the men of the city. But then all the men of the city have to participate, which is a big thing, because that means they're agreeing with it. So even though the elders, or this, the elder governing body, court system, whatever, is making the decision, then if all the men have to participate, that means that they're all agreeing. And so when Dennis Prager talks about this, he's like, it's pretty unlikely that everyone in the city is going to agree to this. But it's such a high level punishment that it's making a point, right? It's making a point, like, this is a serious thing. This rebellion against your parents is not a small thing. It's a big thing, and there are big consequences for it. And so, just because we don't necessarily have a record of this actually happening within Israel, doesn't mean that this warning / situation doesn't have an impact on them. Yeah.
So I've started reading, I showed you this book, Understanding Biblical Law by Drew Johnson, who actually addresses this very specific situation. And it gave me a little bit of insight I hadn't really thought about, because when he's a drunkard and a glutton, it's that in an agricultural type of society, he's eating and wasting his more than his share. His parents are telling him, quit it. He's rebelling against them. His actions are most likely affecting more than just mom and dad.
True.
He's wasting what could be used on a communal basis. So a lot of these laws, it's affecting more than just husband or wife or child and parents.
Yeah.
This individual is wasting resources that could be used for a community. So the community is also weighing in on this issue. So much of this, like what I'm reading through the lens now, is not so much a do not do this as a how are your actions affecting the community.
That's good.
And so every time the Lord says purge this evil from your midst, whatever this individual's doing is having a negative impact on the whole community.
Right.
And to allow that to continue on could be affecting so many people on so many levels. And they, and we've talked before, like a lot of times they may not actually go and kill them, but they remove them from the community.
Yeah, he definitely could have been like exiled. Because really this is giving us the elders can make can kind of give a ruling up to and including, but they could have decided something else, and which could have been you have to go off on your own, find some other people to join with. I would also imagine that in many cases, maybe not 100%, but in many cases, if you're getting to this point and this is, the step that you're at, that might make an impact on this individual, that they might decide that it's time to make some different choices. It also makes me think of, it makes me think of two things. One, it connects back to kind of like what Lori's saying, is that if they really are rebellious and carrying on this, it's almost like it's contagious. This behavior is contagious. If you think about the rebellion of Korah, it started with a couple of people and it became this huge thing. It spread through the camp. So something like this would have the potential to do that too. I think is one thing. And then also it makes me think of, it's not quite the same situation, but it makes me think of even the prodigal son, right? If he's maybe not so rebellious to this point, but still is impacting the father's household, and so the father essentially gives him his inheritance and sends him away. So again, I'm saying this is not exactly matching up the situation, but it's just kind of what came to mind as far as there has to be something. Something has to be done if somebody's not participating according to the rules of the household, the civilization, whatever. So yeah, but I think it's a good point. I think it's a good perspective to think about, that this would be impacting more of the community than just the family, which I think is partially why it becomes a community situation. But yes, but hopefully, but like I said, we don't have record that this ever actually was fully carried out. Not that there weren't consequences when these situations were brought up, but yeah, it's a big deal. It does impact more, and I think you see this. And a lot of these do, as we continue on, it's another thing to keep in mind, is that this is, more of an agricultural community. So there are those things, if you ever, my mom grew up on a farm, lots of family members that were farmers, lived in Wisconsin in a farming community, and it's there's something different about farming communities, right? They help each other out. When it's time to harvest, everybody, there's this whole group that they go around together and all help each other. And if somebody's sick and gets hurt, they're taking care of livestock. It's just that's the kind of culture that exists in those communities. And so I think as you look at some of this, if you keep that in mind, not that this would be exactly like that, but still would give you some kind of perspective on the type of communal. That's the closest, I think, example of a communal thing. Is we live in a very individualistic society. Those farming communities do maintain that sense of community in a higher level.
And I think the thing I was thinking about farming communities is, if there's a fire, everyone shows
right.
up. And it is to help that person for sure, but also because of the way you live. If
right.
one person has a fire, everybody's going to have a fire pretty soon if
right.
you don't show up. And
right.
so I think that's the same principle here, that
yeah.
whatever happens at the family level is going to affect the community
yeah.
level.
And it just I've seen some of the greatest outpourings of love too in those communities. I think my sister's best friend in Wisconsin grew up on a farm, and her dad, this was years ago, I think he probably passed away 15 years ago, but her dad died very suddenly, actually on a trip. It was a whole thing. And so he dies, their kids were grown and not living at home. So they came and helped, but it was the neighboring farmers that it's because in the interim, while they're figuring out what's going to happen, somebody's got to continue to milk the cows, take care of everything. You can't just not do it. And it's I just remember hearing about the neighboring, farmers, just really doing everything for them, because, they were in it was this horrible situation. It was tragic. It was so sad, but it's so cool to see the community come together in that. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but but anyway, coming back to Deuteronomy and some of these lovely situations. we're about to get to some better examples. We're not going to live in the negative the whole time. But the next couple of verses are really interesting. It's this hung on a tree section. So chapter 21, verses 22 and 23.
Your PDF reader version is outdated.
It's updated, brother.
No worries. I'm just going to read these couple verses. It says, "Suppose a man is guilty of a sin with a death sentence, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree. His body is not to remain all night on the tree. Instead, you must certainly bury him on the same day, for anyone hanged is a curse of God. You must not defile your land that Adonai your God is giving you as an inheritance." So there's a couple things. So I read this, and of course it makes me think. It kind of makes me think of Yeshua, which is not exactly the scenario this is talking about, but I do think that there's a connection, because of course Yeshua basically died a sinner's death even though he had no sin. So in that sense, I think that there is a connection to that, and also he was, in the Gospels we read that he was taken down and he was buried, or he was put in a tomb that day, because they didn't want him to be remaining overnight and things like that. So we see some of this carried out. But also this is looking, in a greater context of this, it's looking at the practice, again, the greater ancient world, even up to less ancient times. We don't see this so much now, especially in Western cultures, but that if someone was kind of caught out, they were killed and their body put on display as an example to other people. And again, this is something I think is interesting in some of Dennis Prager's writing about this. It's pointing to that. This is pointing to dignity of the human body. That as humans, even if they have committed great sin, are created in the image of God. So putting a dead body that death again is defiling to the land, to the temple, to the places of God. These things that you don't put it on display. And so it kind of is limiting this display situation to the day that they're killed until the end of the day, and that's it. Whereas sometimes they would do terrible things to people's bodies, really mutilating them and putting them on display, sometimes in pieces and things like that. We don't need to get into all that. It kind of makes my stomach turn a little bit. As an example of if you do something wrong, this is what can happen to you, and this is kind of limiting that. Again, there's this element of dignity to the human body, even in someone who has sinned greatly, even against the community. So, and then again, I do think that there is something of a connection to Yeshua. We do see that some similarities there, but the greater context, I think, is this grotesque display of death in front of the community, that it's being limited. So then chapter 22, we have lots of examples of lots of things. You're basically some of this comes to being a good neighbor. As the first one that we come out is, you're not to watch your brother's ox or sheep going astray. You're supposed to bring them back. So basically, again, this is kind of care for neighbor, in that you're not supposed to just stand by and watch, again, in an agricultural livestock raising society, and one of their animals going, being lost is a big deal. It's not just they lost their pet. That's a bummer. It's it's a bigger deal than that. So you're supposed to look out for each other in that way. And again, it's almost every paragraph is a different topic, which is it feels a little bit sometimes like mental whiplash, I feel because it's okay, so you're not supposed to let your brother's ox and sheep go away, and then it's in verse 5, a man's apparel is not to be worn on a woman. No cross-dressing. So I don't think we need to.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I feel like a lot of those I was thinking as I listened to it again this morning on the way here. I was trying to refresh my memory this morning.
Yeah.
That there are a lot of really practical applications for us. When you see something happening that someone doesn't Like, I feel like in our modern society, sometimes there might be a tendency to be like, oh, do I want to get involved there because I want to help, but they might not think I'm helping. But like we are called to do that if we can. Yeah. And just like that, I think there's a lot of things in the Torah like that. Like, you know, like you're not supposed to keep something that you found. Anyways.
Yeah, and it's like, and it says even if you don't know him, then you're supposed to bring it to your house and then find the person that it belongs to and things like that.
That's like considerable like effort and expense for someone that you don't know that might really not appreciate it. Right, and they like. Yeah, and again, kind of what you're saying is, I mean, I think the modern example, I mean, we are probably, I mean, there are chickens in my neighborhood that have gotten out and been in my yard before, but I'm not usually dealing with other people's animals. But I think what Amanda is saying is like there's something like you see someone, you know, walking out of a store and they drop their wallet. It's like you should pick that up and go after them and give it back, right? I mean, that's a small thing, but even in bigger things, and it's kind of this like standing up for what's right is kind of if you carry the thought out where it comes in there. I think there's some other examples of some things like that too as we go through here, but it's like you don't just watch something happen, someone lose something important and not do something about it. Yeah.
And showing what's right by dressing like you're supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, it fits in there.
Yeah.
I read that to my husband the other day, and he's like, oh, I shouldn't let the grandkids dress me up as a girl. Because he had just done it. I mean, they were playing. But it's okay, honey.
Right, yeah. I mean,
but hello, today, the society.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all seen how this one little verse has, you know, yeah, we've seen some things play out in our society. Yeah. I think we understand what that means. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going. I don't think we need to hash that one out greatly. I think we get it. So verse 6, if you happen on, so this is interesting. This scenario is an interesting one. If you happen on a bird's nest with the young one, and you're not to take the hen with the young. You have to let the hen go, but you can take the eggs, basically. So this feels really interesting. And it even says, but the young, at the end of verse 7, but the young you may take for yourself so that it may go well with you and you may prolong your days. Like, that's actually really interesting. Like, we don't actually see that language very often as far as, like, do this and you will prolong your days. In the land, often it says. We see that with, like, honoring your father and mother. And there's a couple others that are not in my head right now, but it's very rare that we see that language. So it's interesting that we're seeing it here. And I'm not sure that I fully even understand it necessarily. Lori's got some insight for us, though.
Lori's got a whole book on it.
Lori's been reading.
Well, this portion hasn't been in there, but from an agricultural standpoint, it's like, and I ran into this when you're like trying to help starving nations, and you buy them a goat, and you buy them something, and it's supposed to be, okay, here's your chicken. Let it lay eggs so that you can have eggs or have additional. But if you give them a chicken and they go and kill that chicken right off the bat and eat the chicken, then you've got no eggs, no additional food. Yeah. So I think a lot of this of leaving this hen be, you can have her eggs, but so that it'll go well with you, down the road you'll have more food if you allow that animal to live and continue to give off eggs or even with the milk from the goats or the cows. Let that main provider of food, that source, live so that it can give out more. But if you kill it, then you've cut off your supply from that. That's true. So I feel like that a part of that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a component of that. To just keep this reproductive system going on so that you will have food in the future rather than your appetite for right there and then.
That seems like such a no-brainer, though, that it shouldn't even be necessary to say.
There's a lot of things in the Torah like that.
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of things. I think of this sometimes when I won't give specific examples, but like I work in a bakery. The things that we do there are
fairly simple, right? It's not a complicated, like a lot of what we're doing is not complicated. But as I've trained people in different things, I'm like, I've learned I have to tell them this specific step, even though I think that everybody would just naturally do this, but they don't.
Well, and with the third world country, I've run into the same thing, where you're giving them these animals.
But no, I think that in an agrarian society that is used to this cycle of this is what you live off of, I think it should be common sense. I think there's another component which is often brought up about this, partially because it goes to the extent of saying so you may prolong your days, is that it also has to do with how you look at the animal. Because it's insinuating, and how it's often read, at least in some of the commentaries that I've read, is that like, if you're taking both the hen and the eggs, that you're going to eat them both. And that there's something, I don't know what the word is. I don't know what the word is, but it's like, it's not right to have a mother and her young
lack of mercy
killed together. Yeah. In a similar way to we have the commandment of don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Is that what you want to say something about that, Wes? That's just what you wanted to come up with. Yeah, so this verse is often connected with that, of like, because it's like, and sometimes it's like, well, practically if you think like they wouldn't know, but it still is like respect for the animals and respect for a mother and the young and things like that, yeah.
I love this discussion, and the comment, isn't this obvious, and all these different things that you mentioned earlier about polygamy is not allowed in Jewish law anymore, and all this discussion, it just shows how both in Judaism and Christianity there's been this need to try to understand how do you actually practically live these things out. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the Mishnah came about, the Talmud, all these discussions. God has told us to do these things, but and a constitutional country has the same thing. We have a judicial system, and trying to understand how do you actually practically live these things out. And so of course the concern is that you don't get so far off that you're actually violating the very Torah itself, and I think that's the conflict that Yeshua had with some of these fences, which the next portion actually talks about a fence on your
right, which is funny.
So it's just, to me, it's so much fun to discuss it, and then obviously you don't just discuss it to entertain your brain, you discuss it so that you can actually live it out, so you can love your neighbor and love God. And the specific story about the bird's nest, there was a story, I don't know if it's in the Talmud or Mishnah where it exactly is, but if you recall, they asked Yeshua, what's the greatest commandment, and he said, love God, love your neighbor. Mm-hmm. And so in Jerry's discussion, now what's the least commandment? Obviously, I don't know that they were playing off of what Yeshua was asked about the greatest, but I'm sure there's probably discussions about what the greatest also, but I know that there's a story about what's the least commandment, and it's this one about shearing the mother bird from its nest. And it's kind of like, okay, if this is the least, and the consequence is that you may live long, even the least commandment is so good.
Yeah.
That we should not just forget it and say, well, that's so low on the list. Let's just. I mean, there is a weightier commandments and lighter commandments, that whole understanding too. But there's emphasis that if this is the least commandment, and there's this consequence of it, how amazing are all of God's laws and commandments.
And so I think, I think that's a good framework, and I think, and so sometimes what this is boiled down to is, which is maybe a poor choice of words, but like when you think about both, sorry, I didn't realize it, the kid and its mother's milk and this hen and eggs situation is like thinking about animals and having care for animals, even though there is this reality that animals are for food, that humans rule over animals. Like, it's not like, but because we're not supposed to go so far as that animals have more rights than humans, right? But you're also supposed to care about creation, is kind of the tension, or that we're kind of dealing with here. Yeah. I think there's also, even though this isn't connected with the, like later on we're gonna get the passage that talks about, I just totally lost my train of thought about what it says. About like, how you're supposed to harvest and you're supposed to leave out the. I think there is a part of this that's also like, don't be avaricious, don't be greedy. Right. Like you can take the eggs, and that's a blessing to you that you got those. You don't have to take everything that's potentially available. You can leave the hens that others can get eggs in the future too. So like I think there's a part of this Torah person that's just talking about like, you don't have to consume everything. It's good and right to leave something for others. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's, and I think that fits in, like, again, we're kind of like looking at this piece by piece, but if you think the greater, right, like the greater message I think we're supposed to get from really this whole portion is like, how do you love God, love neighbor, care for creation, care for the outsider, deal with sin correctly, all these things. Like, how do you live in an ordered society is kind of my summary of this portion.
It's almost like elaboration on go and subdue the earth. Yeah. This is how, like, given you mankind dominion over this place. So this is how you are to rule it. Yeah. And that's good. He's chosen Israel here as a people to rule correctly. Yeah. Here. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And even as we get, like kind of along those lines, I'm going to keep moving through some of this because we've got a lot left. So if I go through something quickly that you really want to talk about, you can stop me. But I'm going to go quickly through a few things here.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
It's kind of based on what Jim was saying. Like the rabbis, they saw that commandment as being the least for various reasons. Won't get into that, but just interesting that least commandment. You look at the reward that's attached to it. So it's the reward that's attached to one of the greatest commandments, the commandment given with the promise of honoring your parents, like in the Ten Commandments. So that set up a precedence for the Jewish people to approach all of the commandments. Not like say, oh well, that's the least. We shouldn't, spend much time on that. It's just interesting that the wording of it. Yeah. The promise, it's there. You can't avoid it.
For sure, absolutely. Okay, so we kind of were, Jim was kind of briefly bringing up the next one in verse 8. It's making a guardrail on your roof because, of course, these are flat-topped houses that roofs are often like another living space, an outdoor living space. You would gather with people, maybe have meals, but if you have a flat roof with nothing around it, it is possible for someone to fall off of it. So basically, caring for your neighbor by making sure they're not going to fall off your roof. Which is just, creating safe spaces for people, I guess you could say.
Building codes.
Building codes, yes, that's good. And then we get into the vineyards of not planting, kind of mixing things is kind of the next little section of a vineyard with two kinds of seed. Not putting an ox and a donkey together, which is, again, caring for animals, because that would be painful for those animals to be yoked together because they're very different in sizes and strength. And if you have unmatched animals under a yoke, it's very painful for both of them. And not wearing a woven mixture and different things like that. And so this is really kind of getting at there's a whole Dennis Prager has a whole discussion about distinction. What God has made distinct don't mix together in that. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. But and then we get into this man takes a wife and dislikes her, and this whole thing about proving her virginity and all of that. And so basically, again, this kind of comes down to like you can't, a man can't just cast away his wife just because he wants to. There's protocols for this, and there are consequences if you don't follow it. But and it goes on quite in a lot of detail for a while about this whole thing. And then it transitions into, I'm going to kind of lump all of this together through basically through the end of chapter 22. it goes into a woman who's engaged and sleeps with another man, which engagement was like, betrothal was almost considered marriage, like a legal status of marriage, even though they hadn't come together and lived together yet. So this is a big deal. Not that it's not a big deal even without it, but just saying, like, in this culture, this engagement or betrothal period had the same legal status as marriage. And it talks about all these things, but basically, it talks about what's supposed to happen in these different scenarios, and again, like, purging evil from their midst if there's deception going on here. And I don't remember, let me see. I don't remember if there's another part of this. But, and I'm just scanning back through this quickly, so I don't remember how it talks about, but it basically is like, you have to bring them both out. Like, if woman engaged to another man is with a man who's not who she's engaged to, you have to bring them both out and before the court. And so if you think about the woman in John 8 who is accused of adultery, think about, if you read this and then think about that situation, it's all wrong. Because they didn't bring the man out, there's not two witnesses, there's all, there's all these things that are supposed to happen. This is basically, that story is basically like this kangaroo court that in some sense is trying to catch Yeshua. So there's a lot of contrast between those. It's an interesting study to look at what the Torah describes is supposed to happen in that situation and what is actually happening there, and see that they are not following Torah properly. And of course, Yeshua wins that one. So Yeshua always wins. And so, but you can see some of the contrast there. I want to get to a few of these other things, so I'm going to keep going because we've got like 20 minutes left. So when we get to 23, we get into more really interesting situations. So it starts off talking about a man not taking his father's wife, which, because of the language here, like, and we've already, like, the Torah has already addressed situations of incest. The father's wife it's talking about is probably not the mother of the son in this scenario. It's another wife. But still saying you can't do that. Yes. And then we get into this interesting discussion of someone with crushed or cut off genitals is entering the community of Adonai, or no one born of forbidden relations or incest, which there's a lot of debate about what in Hebrew, like what that term actually means. We're not going to get into all of that right now, but it seems like this is that kind of like incest is a very possible understanding of this situation, and it's even to the 10th generation of the descendants are to enter the community of Adonai. No Ammonite or Moabite is to enter the community of Adonai, even to the 10th generation. None belonging them is to enter the community of Adonai forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water when you came on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam son of Beor from Petor of Aram Naharim to curse you. But Adonai your God you refused to listen to Balaam, and Adonai your God turned the curse into a blessing because he loves you. You are not to seek their shalom or welfare all your days. Also, the Ammonites and the Moabites are the descendants of Lot. So they're actually the descendants from Lot and his relations with his daughters. So they are people that came from an incestuous interaction. So that kind of fits in our context here if we're talking about that. But this is a pretty big thing for the Lord to be saying, that these entire people groups you cannot, which of course these become people that Israel's not supposed to intermix with. We know that they do. They're not supposed to allow them to live, and we know that they do. And that causes all kinds of issues. But it's interesting that, this history with these people plays such a big role into them not even being able to be part of, they're not supposed to be part of Adonai's people. But then it goes, and I want to connect this with it a little bit, in verse 8 of chapter 23, you are not to detest an Edomite, for he is your brother. And you are not to detest an Egyptian, for you are an outsider in his land. The children born to them, the third generation, may enter the community of Adonai. So basically, the Edomites and the Egyptians do have a way to be part of the community of Israel, which is interesting. But it talks about the third generation. So kind of pointing, which I think kind of is pointing a little bit to, sometimes it does take, it takes some time, right, for people's nature and culture and traditions to really change, which I think that we even see that in the modern world. Like, I think of some of the families, because to be honest, like, it's really hard to, like, leave your I mean, we see this, like, even just culturally, like, it's like, if you think of people who have, like, immigrated to the United States from other cultures, like, it's really hard to be in a place where everything is different. So it's hard to learn the customs and the way that things work, just naturally, we're not even talking about a spiritual reality. But then here, we have this, you know, almost certainly coming from a polytheistic worldview to a monotheistic worldview is a really big shift. So it can take some time for that to work out. And so I even see like families and people that I know who are like the first believers in their family, even if, you know, they've been culturally American for forever, like that shift in the family line is a big thing. And it's difficult. Not that they are true believers of the Lord, but their children, like the children's experience in those families is different if they grow up in a believing home, whereas their parents didn't. You can see. I have several friends that that's the situation. You can see the difference between their life as the one who has made that commitment as the first one in their family versus their children growing up in that environment. Which is a good thing. We want to see each generation, like, right? Like, that's kind of the goal, right? Like, is you always, like, parents always talk about wanting their kids to stand on their shoulders or go further than them, and I think it's something that you can really see in families where the parents are like the first believers and then they have children that are raised in it. You can see some of that shift in a really big way. So anyway, I don't know that that's exactly what is going on here, but that's what it makes me think of, is that sometimes it takes a couple of generations for that culture and for that identity to fully shift your allegiance, even in a family line, to the God of Israel. And it also is like the fact that it's like God is okay with it taking multiple generations is like is also kind of showing his mercy. Like he understands like human nature and the time it takes for a shift to happen. And sometimes I'm like, well, he's just not in as much of a hurry as maybe we are sometimes. Even though, I mean, I think he does want all of our allegiance and all of our hearts. But all that to say is like sometimes I think a true shift within a family or within a group of people takes a long time, and that's okay. Doesn't mean that it's not meaningful and that the Lord isn't working if it doesn't happen all at once like we sometimes want it to.
Emma?
Yeah?
I wonder if we could just take half a step back. You were talking about the illegitimate birth, but that seems to have a direct impact on Yeshua. So he was born, that was like scandal times 10.
Right.
Probably nobody really believed the story.
Right.
Yeah, Holy Spirit, right, came upon you, sure. Now, in his case, he was whisked away to Egypt for many years there, so there was a time for a reset, and then they came back to not the same town, a completely different town and region, but nonetheless, there's like, the word is mamzer, and as a mamzer, some versions would say bastard, or just, you could say illegitimately born, as a mamzer, there's all kinds of rights you did not have. Like, you couldn't study in the academies, you couldn't, there's a whole list of things, you were just like cast out, almost like a leper. But I wonder how much he suffered of, I he had rejection throughout his life on many levels.
Yeah.
But that this was a mega source of like early community taboo and rejection potentially. I don't know.
Yes. I mean, he certainly was rejected. I don't know that this actually fits it, because yes, it does talk about, and this is where that word mamzer is not quite agreed upon of exactly what that means. It was, especially in like some of the King James translations and things like that, as bastard or illegitimate child, or born out of wedlock, or to a prostitute, or something along those lines. But as you carry out and you see some other things that happen through Israel's history, it doesn't seem like that quite fits. And so another one of the suggested meanings is more of like incest type of relationship, which would not be what we have with Yeshua. So which I think the context of incest fits a bit more with what is talking about and what the consequences and things like that are. So we don't know for sure. So, I mean, but regardless, I do think that the situation in which Yeshua is born is also, because it's unlikely that a lot of people would have, at least at first, believed the story of the Holy Spirit coming on Mary and which again, points to Joseph really actually wanting to be honorable, because he could, she's pregnant and it's not his child. Yeah. He could have taken further, much more drastic measures and said he was going to divorce her quietly. So he was still being, honoring her more than what was necessarily required. And then of course he obeys the Lord when the Lord appears to him. But it still is unlikely. It's that everybody's going to fully believe this story. And so I do think that there was rejection based off of the circumstances of his birth, but I'm not sure that it necessarily, again, we don't know for sure, but I don't know if it fully fits in the category of this.
Yeah, it appears 2 times, so that's why it's such a challenge to hammer down, well, what does it really mean?
Yeah, exactly. So it could be, but I kind of lean a little bit more towards it's talking a little bit more of a situation of incest or something, but it could be. But I mean, I still think that the situation, any situation where you have a child born out of wedlock, or to not the father is not the man that you're marrying and things like that, that does bring rejection and judgment and issues on the family. So I definitely think Yeshua experienced some of that. I don't know. I think it's possible, and I'm not sure fully. I'm not willing to say 100% one way or the other whether it's exactly this situation. But I do think culturally there's
it must have had clarity, because if the punishment is to the 10th generation, you don't just throw that out like
right.
that. That's a serious punishment.
Right.
So it's they'd have to have clarity, at least in their day, of what that really meant.
Right.
Who is and who is not.
Right? Yeah. And somewhere it's been lost a little bit. Lori? Right.
So just so that I've got this right in my mind on chapter 23, the way I'm reading this is about, because it keeps saying for someone to enter the community. Mm-hmm. So these guidelines to me seem more like outsiders who want to come in and be part of the community, rather than those who are already in the community and this situation happens. Because we were talking like this even with crushed or cut off genitals to enter the community, since eunuchs were not a practice in Hebrew life.
Right. Yeah.
This would to me have been something more like a practice of another foreign nation, and now all of a sudden this person wants to enter your community. And I could be reading that wrong, but the reason I keep looking at these enter the community makes me think that they were not somebody that's part of the original community, but they want to join in, and you can't allow this type of practice or this type of tradition to come in and join into your community. Am I reading that right? Or?
No, I think you're right. So sometimes it's it's interesting. I think that's probably a good guideline. So the one with crushed or cut off genitals is almost certainly someone outside of Israel who's wanting to join in, because you're saying, Israel, Israelite Hebrew culture doesn't have this, but others did. Because it's not talking about someone who's born with some kind of defect.
Or had an accident.
That's a different scenario.
This is something has intentionally been done to this person. And so this would be someone who's participated in some kind of pagan ritual of that kind in another nation. So with this person with forbidden relations, which actually I like that the TLV translates it as forbidden relations, because if we look at the rest of the context of the forbidden relations, it is largely incest, which is again why I tend to lean that way. So it probably is also someone outside of. But there's different, again, because there's so much argument about what this word means and what this is, of whether it's always someone outside or could be someone from within Israel also. So that particular one, even though it's in the context of this, sometimes there's a lot of discussion and a lot of disagreement about exactly what that means. I think with the way it's written, I think it would make sense for it to be someone who's from outside who's wanting to join, but there's also a lot of discussion about exactly what community of Adonai means here. So there's a lot of opinions. Yeah.
I have a question about the Moabite entering the assembly. So do we see that as talk about Moabite men? Because obviously the story of Ruth,
right,
a Moabite woman marrying Boaz, and then their descendants become David, king of Israel. So can we just safely take that that's talking about just Ammonite and Moabite men?
Probably. I think that's reasonable. I don't know that I'm willing to say definitively 100%, because it doesn't. But, I mean, we did and then do have to deal with the situation of Ruth if we look at this. But sometimes I think that if we don't make... There's also this reality of, like, we don't make the rule off of the exception. So Ruth was very much an exception, not the rule. So I think that God is merciful, and she was pure-hearted, and she was joining herself to Israel, renouncing all of the gods, and joined as a woman. So I think it is a little bit different because she's a woman, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it would be okay for all women either. So that's a tricky one. I don't know. I think largely, yes, I think it's reasonable to think that that this would apply to men, but I don't know that we can say it doesn't apply to women. Yeah.
Well, if back in Numbers, when they had the whole issue with the Midianites and joining themselves, the whole Balaam, and they were told, don't take these women in.
Right.
So to me, since Deuteronomy is kind of a reiterating of how to keep problems out of here, part of that was don't be marrying women that are going to draw your hearts away. So that's why I could see the Moabites being just as much women as men, because that became a huge issue, ongoing issue for them when they would marry these women and then serve their gods or do the dual worship type of stuff going on there.
Yeah, because I think we even, like, which again is back to just because we have the story of Ruth doesn't negate it for the rest, because like we even see, isn't it? Am I remembering? It's been a bit since I've read Ruth. Am I remembering correctly? Like, because Naomi's other daughters-in-law turned back. They were coming and they turned back, so they didn't align their hearts. Like, so Ruth almost had this like supernatural realignment of her heart with Israel, and so I think so she is definitely a unique exception. I wouldn't extend it to the rest of the Moabite women. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting that it talks about that in the context of like the crushed genitals. Well, like I wonder if because there's different groups of Gentiles in the law. There are the ones who become proselyte. There are the ones who receive circumcision, right? In the case of Ben, right? And they're to be treated as though they are of Israel then.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there are others like the uncircumcised strangers as well. So I wonder if there's a distinction there between like which group would be the ones entering the assembly of the Lord? Are they entering as, is this talking about just blanket? Is it talking about just uncircumcised strangers in the land? Is it saying, no, these people are barred from that circumcision of the proselyte, right? Which is it, or is it all of it?
It's a good question.
Yeah. And then you have Isaiah 56 that talks about eunuchs and foreigners who bind themselves to the covenant and don't disagree the Shabbat.
Right, which it could be some accident or birth defect situation also, because this is talking about intentionally mutilating.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, most of the commentaries bring up that verse when they bring up that context when it talks about this, but that is probably a natural or accidental situation that is causing that, versus this is specifically talking about, this is referring to something that has been done intentionally.
And I was curious, where does that come from? Who says that it's intentional as opposed to accidental? Who's saying that?
I mean, I think it's come up in every commentary I've ever read about it.
Right. The word's only used 3 times. I'm not trying to make a point. I'm just curious about that. It seems to be, I don't know, it seems to be some gray area here just because of how little it's used.
I think it does become, because if we look at some greater context, there are other. I mean, there's the Isaiah passage, and there's some others of why are this group treated differently than other times they come up, where they are allowed to come in and be part of the community, versus these people are not.
The word's used to squeeze a ripen date. So to squeeze a ripen date, that's the same word. So I think because of things like that, it's like, okay, what does this really mean? I'm certainly not there. I'm not saying I know what it means. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
If you're saying that it's intentional, almost like it's a pagan that has had something intentional against them. I guess I don't see that anywhere. But
I mean, I think again, it's coming down to, if we look at all the context of people who have this situation, then they're like we're saying, in Isaiah and in other places, I'd have to look at other for other references. I don't have them on the top of my head, but where it talks about someone who has some kind of this deformity, that they're still able to worship God. They may not be able to enter into the tabernacle or the temple space, which that's a whole discussion. But these people are not even allowed to join to the community.
Right.
So that means there's something different about how they came to be this way versus people who are this way and are allowed to be part of the community.
Because otherwise it would appear to be too harsh if it was just
if you're born in Israel with this, then it's okay,
so it could be based
we're
on
just going to leave you
deduction.
out in the wilderness.
It could be based on logical deduction. And the rabbis, they've got a whole stream of thought based on logical deduction. They've come up with a whole bunch of commandments, and that's valid. In their eyes, logical deduction that's a valid method of interpreting.
Yeah.
So okay.
So
kind of interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're at the end of our time, but let me see this. Let's see if there's anything that I really want to talk about. Okay, so I'll just kind of give some general comments about a couple of things. So chapter 24, is very largely dealing with different situations where we have the dignity of individuals. So, again, when this comes to divorce, it requires a man to write a certificate of divorce, which, again, other nations did not require that. They could just, send a woman away at will. This requires them going through this process, which, again, would take some time. Potentially, they would reevaluate, whatever. And so it talks about situations where we have loans, we have things like that, which a lot of times loans in this context have to do with someone who is poor or in a difficult situation. Not necessarily it's not necessarily talking, though it could be, but a business loan. This is more talking about somebody can't cover basic needs, and so they're getting a loan and they're not allowed to charge interest and take advantage of someone who's in a bad situation, basically. There's other things. Fathers not being put to death for their children, and children not put to death for their fathers. Not twisting justice for an outsider. Not taking collateral. Basically, there's a couple different situations of collateral of not taking basically something that somebody is using to create their livelihood, or it talks about like a widow's clothing, like so something that's really all this person has is like you can't take that as collateral. And then the end of the chapter talks about the forgotten sheaf in a field during harvest, and anything that you might not get on the first pass essentially of a harvest that you're to leave for the outsider. And again, we can think of Ruth in that situation because she goes along behind them, right, and picks from the fields. So again, it goes to this idea of not being greedy, of not being selfish, of having compassion for the outsider in your midst. And it even brings up again the context of Egypt. Remember that you were once an outsider, and so just having compassion for those in their midst. And then chapter 25 gives us mostly kind of some justice situations. And so again, we talked about briefly towards the beginning of this situation where a man dies and his brother takes the widow as a wife, and it's really to care for her and to continue that family line. It talks about some other situations, and I really like and not having stones of different weights. So like as far as so you're not. So we're talking about business dealings of not being unfair, like if you're weighing something, of using different weights for different people to take advantage of them and things like that. So full and honest weight and full honest measure. And this is the other one that says, this is 25, like verse 15. Full honest weight and measure, so that your days may be long that in the land that Adonai is giving to you. So basically it's another one of those like treat people fairly so that things can go well for you. And then I really love the last verse of this. For all who do these things, all who do injustice are detestable to Adonai your God. So I know we have a lot of justice-minded people in this room, that injustice is actually detestable to God, but our justice also does have to align with his, because he is a just God. So I kind of like that as this, I think that even kind of sums up a lot of this portion in these situations. Is it's finding justice for people, and just dealing honorably and honestly in all these different scenarios that have come up through this portion. That he's trying to create a just and righteous people, and so I like that. And then there's this little thing about Amalek, which we don't have time. We're not going to get into, but at the very end of the portion. But I like that it ends this section about all who do injustice are detestable to Adonai. So which kind of points to us learning what his justice is and lining up with it. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.